At Birkbeck University of London, Dr. Victoria Southgate is a developmental cognitive neuroscientist, looking to map out the stages of development of early human social cognition. That is, how infants and toddlers come to make sense of the social world around them.
I suppose my big question is to understand how this knowledge comes about. I don't believe that infants come into the world with this knowledge. I think they learn this information and that they're extremely good at paying attention to the right things and generating hypotheses about what's going to happen and testing those hypotheses with data that's coming in all the time. Babies spend first 6 months of their lives almost just observing others before they really start to do anything themselves. So they don't even start interacting with objects really until they're around 4 months. They have a huge amount of data coming into their system that they can use and they can learn from. And I suppose the biggest question that I have is, what is the contribution of this information to the developing concepts that infants have? How could they acquire, for example, an understanding someone else has a preference for something or a desire for something just from watching what other people are doing? And how does their brain incorporate this information and develop mechanisms that allow them to take that information and make predictions about what's going to happen in a new situation?
From her first tests, which observed eye tracking in babies to examine their predictions, Victoria and her team have more recently turned to other methods, such as EEG.
One problem with the false belief tasks is that it's great if infants make the correct eye movements, but if they don't make the correct eye movements, it's a null result. So we don't know whether it means that they just could not generate the correct prediction or whether something else in the scene just grabbed their attention. So eye movements, they work quite well in older babies when you can set up these quite complex situations. But in younger babies, these EEG badges might actually tell us more. We put a cap full of electrodes on the baby's head and we measure naturally occurring electrical activity. And within this recording, we can extract different frequencies.
One of Victoria's tasks examines what neuromechanisms are involved when infants witness objects being hidden from both themselves and others, measuring the brain's gamma band activity.
When you hide an object from a baby, you see an increase in this gamma activity, which seems to reflect them trying to maintain this object in memory, even though they can't see it. If they really represent objects as occluded from others, then maybe we would see the same activation when they see that an object is hidden from somebody else.
No, it's this. Look, a rattle.
And this is what we find. Infants show this gamma band activation both when the object is occluded from themselves and also when the object is occluded from the other person. And what this suggests also is that they're using a similar mechanism for representing objects from the other's perspective as they use for representing objects from their own perspective. So this really suggests to us that actually, yes, infants are understanding when people can't see something. And this is sort of trying to get at the building blocks of this ability to represent other people's beliefs. So this is a way in which we're using EEG to try to tell us more about what much younger babies are understanding of these situations. One of the challenges, I think, in answering the question of whether what infants are doing when they're passing these tasks is the same as what adults are doing or what older children are doing is to look at which areas of the brain are activated when infants are doing these tasks. So we know there's a particular area of the brain called the temporoparietal junction that is recruited whenever adults are thinking about other people's thoughts.
Where's the drug? Oh, there's a drug.
A very important contribution will be if we can look at this brain area in infants and see whether actually it's involved or not involved. I think if we show that it's involved, it will be very strong evidence that they are maintaining representations of others' beliefs or creating representations of others' beliefs in a very similar way as adults do. If we don't find activation of that brain region, it will be very interesting because what it will tell us is probably that there's a lot of development that is going to go on until you actually get to an adult-like theory of mind. And it might tell us that infants are passing these tasks in very different ways.
Are you gonna smile?
So I think that's going to be one way in which we can really move forward with this debate.
Gathering such data from infants has its unique set of challenges.
You have a huge dropout rate. You might test 60 infants and only be able to use data from 20 infants. And this is especially the case in neuroimaging studies where we need infants to sit still. Infants, depending on the age, are not terribly interested in the same things we are, so won't actually understand that we want them to sit still. So we lose a lot of infants. So that's one challenge of doing this kind of work. But the more you do it, the better you become at designing studies that interest infants. We try to do a lot of our studies in a live situation where there's a real person sitting in front of the infant doing things. A huge challenge is in just designing as many different studies as you can where you get converging data. And at some point, it becomes very difficult to think of an alternative explanation that will converge all of this data and make sense of it, other than perhaps attributing to infants a concept of false belief. By far the biggest challenge is interpreting, what longer looking means, what this particular neural correlate actually means, and convincing others of that.
To break down the steps of cognitive development in infants, and to understand how they grow to have theory of mind, Victoria is working with a network of researchers.
We and others are looking at what are the building blocks. So what are the different things that you need to have in place in order to actually think about someone's beliefs? Is it necessary to dissociate your own perspective from the other's perspectives? Are you representing your perspective at all? So we're doing different studies trying to look at whether perhaps infants are biased towards representing others' beliefs at the expense of their own.
Finding answers would also provide invaluable insight into not only what goes right, but what may go wrong in an infant's cognitive development.
If we understand, for example, how paying attention to what other people are doing leads us to develop a concept of false belief, ultimately, then if children are not paying attention to what other people are doing, there's going to be huge cascading effects. I think that's the real challenge, is mapping almost the developmental trajectory. So how does experience observing others, how can that possibly be integrated into something like a notion of false belief? And that's a huge question, and I'm not sure how we will answer that question, apart from to just, keep going.